It's been a crazy week, and it's been a crazy week mainly in America that has spilt out all over the world, I think. And we've seen these protests in response to the George Floyd, I keep wanting to say Pink Floyd, I don't know why, but George Floyd's poor demise. And I think this hasn't finished playing itself out yet. I think it's spilt out into other parts of the world. I think this is going to go on for a little while. And I think all eyes are going to be on what happens in the way that America deals with this. The protests are very long, and I don't really want to get into a whole political debate about this. We in South Africa have been through our moments of having to deal with apartheid and racism and things. But I don't know at the end of all of this if anything in South Africa has really changed other than maybe just the constitution. We've got inclusive, an inclusive constitution that is one of the most robust in terms of political systems in the world. But yet, on a day-to-day basis, we see racism and reverse racism, which is just racism per se anyway. And will it ever get out of people's hearts? I don't know. It was interesting because, ever since Ramdas passed away late last year, the Love, Serve, Remember Foundation has been very much active, and they've been carrying on the legacy of Ramdas. I like what they're doing, but there are also little parts of it that sort of stick with me a little bit. But they put out a circular, this circular, just a few days ago, and the headline of that circular sort of says the following. It is a quote from Ramdas. It says, "Silence itself is an act of acquiescence to a system." And it's true, it was silence in terms of people, amazing people who must have felt conscience back in the time when Hitler was fomenting what he was doing. And I suppose people felt as though they couldn't talk out because they felt fearful of the system, or they maybe felt as though they were on the wrong path. So I don't, for various reasons, people didn't speak out. I'm of an age where I lived through the latter part of apartheid, and there was a lot going on, and I never spoke out. I didn't even feel the need to speak out, and it was only afterwards, in hindsight, that I sort of look back at it, and there's a part of me that cringes and says, "Ugh, that was really horrible. How come I never stuck my hand up and did something about it?" And it's not that I wasn't brave. I think as a 19-year-old, I was brave enough to stand against the apartheid system, and ended up in solitary confinement and dark cells and all sorts of things, and that never fazed me one bit. And yet it was not on my radar to see that that system was awful. I remember we lived in Edenvale, and around about 9 o'clock at night, for most of my childhood, there was the equivalent of an air raid siren that went off at 9 at night, and that was curfew time for black people, non-white people, to get off the streets. And they had to go wherever they had to go, and they had to get off the streets quickly because the cops had to do their rounds after 9 o'clock, and any non-white would be arrested. And I don't know, no one ever spoke about that. No one ever thought that was a heinous thing to do. No one ever thought to protest against that. I remember, without even thought, going to, wow, Clement, nice background. I remember going without thought to the post office and walking in to the part that was whites only, and sitting there and doing what I had to do as a youngster, and then not thinking, not even batting an eyelid about the lengthy queue of people that were standing on the other side, trying to get some meager service, because they were only ever served when there was no white in the white section, because the tunny had to go then from the white section across the counter to the non-white section and go and help somebody there for a moment until some bloody privileged white walked back in again. And then she'd abandon those people waiting and go back on the other side. How we didn't have civil war and revolt, I do not know. And where this is going to go in America, I don't know. But it made me think, and it's made me think a lot about how do we get ourselves into these situations in the first place. And there's although this goes on for a couple of pages, and how the Love, Serve, Remember Foundation doesn't want to distance itself from racism and endemic hatred and all that kind of stuff. It does have a paragraph here that I just want to read. It says, "In order to reflect the values of our organization," this is Love, Serve, Remember, which include unconditional love, "we are committed to expand diversity, inclusion, and equity within our leadership, management, and staff, while educating white people within our community about race, racism, and white privilege. And that includes ourselves. So it's encouraging to see that in America, people are starting to look at themselves, at their organizations, and starting to see where in these organizations there may be any form of endemic hatred or white superiority. It's also quite sad to see that with George Floyd's, the protests around George Floyd, that they're both deeply extreme left-wing and deeply extreme right-wing factions that sort of come in and take advantage of the situation and just foment hatred and try and disrupt the whole system and turn it around to make a political statement of their own. And that's quite sad too. It says, after centuries of violence and racism that is passed from generation to generation, not just as hatred, but as ignorance, privilege, apathy, and access, we must work to change in this society and to reach the hearts of all. And that is true. So where did this start? And it made me think back about myself. Where did this all start? And how did I get caught up in a system that I wasn't even aware of? And it's a metaphor that I use with my clients very often. I say, just imagine that you have a book. This is an old book. It's an old family heirloom kind of book. And I always imagine when I do meditation or a little bit of self-hypnosis, I imagine like one of those big old leather-bound books, and you open up this leather folder, and there are a whole lot of old foolscap folio pages, almost like parchment pages. And every single thing that I have ever done has been written in that book. Call it the Akashic Field, if you like. Call it just history and memory, if you like. And as life happens, there's almost this hand, the scribe, and it's just scribing and writing in the book, and it's creating a timeline, a story. And this is the story. And I can take all of those pages that are just loosely held in this binder, in this folder, and I can take those pages out and I can arc them out in front of me. I can spread them out in front of me like gamers would spread out cards on a casino table. I could just fan out these folio pages, and I can look back at them and I can see the history, the storyline. And I can cringe at some of the things that I see there. And last time around, I said I found a box of things, old letters of mine from my granny and stuff that I'd written. Things I've been on a little witch hunt for archive stuff that I've sentimentally hoarded. And in fact, in that kind of hunt for things, I even found old cassette recordings with my voice on when I was like a kid of about 16, and I wanted to be a broadcaster, and I did a radio program on an old cassette tape, and it sounds hideous, and I'm kind of thinking, oh my, this is so embarrassing. I can't even listen to this, you know. But it's important to do that because it gives us a reference of how we've grown. But how come in my storyline, indelibly written in ink, by some scribe's hand, I have these moments of embarrassment or moments of naivety or insensitivity that I only look back at now and think, oh, those are deeply embarrassing. Where did that come from? And here in the auditorium, just out back here, everyone's seen it, I'm sure, that's been to the auditorium. There's a blue ball of modeling clay. It's like Kitty's plasticine. And everyone's had a go at that. Neville has had a go at that. Aidan, I know you've had a go at that. And you've pulled off pieces of it and shaped it into stuff. And there's like this asparagus forest with rocks around it, which I kind of think I know what you meant. But you know, this piece of plasticine has been shaped into all sorts of different shapes. And I noticed just like Neville, because of my OCD, Neville will go around and take all the cup handles and move them around in the mug tray just to sort of disrupt me a little bit. But this ball of plasticine, one day I took this ball of plasticine and I thought it's getting a little bit too sort of graphic. I need to sort of like reshape it a little bit. It had sort of bodily parts on it that I didn't want my clients to see if they walked past. So I reshaped it, and as I was reshaping this modeling clay, it's a very waxy thing. It's an artist's clay. It's not really a kid's toy. It needs to be warmed up before you can shape it. And when it cools down, it's rock solid. You can cast things from that, a plaster cast from that, or whatever. And as I was trying to reshape this, I noticed that it's really a metaphor like my brain. This thing has everyone else's fingerprints in it. The shape that this is in might not appeal to me, but it's not a shape that I necessarily wanted or liked. But it's there, and just like my brain, I need to get my hands around this thing, and I need to warm it, and I need to make it malleable for change, and then only can I start to shape this in a way that can turn it into something that I like, something says speaker's not working here. Just jiggle a couple of things. But anyway, I think so long as you can hear me, if you can't hear me, just give me a thumbs down or something. But if I can shape this, it's just like me working on my brain. I have to do that introspection. I have to hold this in my hands, and I have to work with it consistently, ongoing, until such a time as I can warm it up, ready it for change, and put it into a new configuration that is a shape that I like. And I think that's what life is all about. And whose fingerprints were in this bit of blue clay in the beginning? Certainly my parents had a huge influence. Mirror neurons in my brain just reflected the things that mom and dad were doing, and I just picked up that world from them. It was their world, and as I picked up that world, I just made it mine. It was a download. It was an upload, if you like, of the world and the memes and the genes and everything that gave me personality that had sort of solidified by about the age of 7 or so. And it's been up to me as an adult to reshape and not be so hard on myself that brain, that shape, that personality was the way my parents wanted to shape it. It was, that's a call just to supposedly phone my mom, just let me silence it quickly, there we go. It's a shape my mum would have wanted of me, but it's not necessarily a shape that I feel I need to carry on into my future, into my adult life. So I think we need to look at the story that is written, this transcript of life that lies fanned out there on the table or on the floor in front of us, and we need to go back and see some of those old writings of the past and say, I understand where these came from. I understand how the system, because whose fingerprints are in that blue bit of modeling clay? Mom and dad's. The preachers that stood up on the podium at the Jehovah's Witness Kingdom Hall and told their story, politicians, P.W. Botha and the like of the day, and all of those things that we learned at school, and the story, and the fact that we were segregated, and as kids we just took it as a norm. All of those things were someone else's influence in shaping the brain in the beginning. And that's written in the storyline. And there's nothing we can do about that storyline. It's history. But what we have is the ability to step back from that storyline, to detach ourselves from the storyline. So we are both observer, sitting in a chair, looking at these folios of paper strewn out in front of us. We are the observer. We can take a detached view of that storyline, and we can see it. And it may make us cringe, and we may sort of feel awful and horror of it. But at the same time, we are also the actor or actress in the storyline. And as this person in the storyline, we sort of caught in a storyline. And we performing the things that we need to do in that storyline, and we buffeted around about by it. So there are times in the storyline where we're in an emotional state or in a state of panic, or we're lost. Sometimes we're inspired, sometimes we're magnificent, other times we just want to hide away in shame. And so the person, if I had to go and get an actor to play the role of me, that's the equivalent of that person who's got the storyline. The script is there, and they are method actors. They are perfect actors who can just play those lines. And somewhere along the way, maybe even as the actor or the actress in the story, this actor stops for a moment and says, this story sucks. This is a hideous story. I don't even want to play this part. Why, where's the story going? This is just a crappy story. And then maybe the person sitting, the director or the author, the observer of the story, stops and says, no, but hang on a minute, just keep playing the story, because you don't know where the story is going. You know how all of these past pages have led you to this moment and who you are in the story. But notice that out here on the floor, not only are these pages spread out with writing on them, you can see the writing and all the story of who you are, but in the future, there are enough pages to carry the storyline on all the way to the death. And those pages are just blank. And what are you going to do with those pages? Are you going to keep this same storyline going forward ad infinitum until the end, until you've run out of paper and you turn your toes to the sky and you die? Or are you going to do something else with those pages? How about taking the very next page and embellishing it? How about, like Marlene so beautifully does, how about drawing on that page and making some art as a border, as a frame to that page? How about then using that as the metaphoric context of tomorrow's page or today's page, a bit later today, to embellish that page and to put beautiful things on that page and to make that a stunning page, and then live life commensurate with that page. And to take those pages and let the story unfold in a new context. I can have this trajectory of life that goes in a particular line, and I can say, given the past, if I plot the course of life, I can see that it's going to, if it doesn't change, if the angle doesn't change at all, this story is going to end up in disaster. This story is going to end up in mediocrity. This story is going to just be much of the same. And but right now, I have a choice moment. This is a moment of choice. And every single millisecond of every day, as we're sitting in the moment of now, we have a millisecond of choice. And I can make that storyline change. I can take a big, thick black marker, Koki pen, and I can put a black border around that page, like they do with funeral notices, and I can make this a sinister story with a lot of darkness in it. That's my choice. I can pivot that storyline out of the mediocrity, out of me being mediocre, and I can pivot it downwards, and I can make it sinister and dark and ugly. I could take paint and color and joy and vibrance, and I can embellish the side of those pages and put glitter on and gold leaf and all sorts of things, and I can live a story of joy and abundance and magnificence. I have that ability right now to be able to choose how I'm going to use that next piece of paper. And what are we going to do with that next piece of paper? And I think a lot of people don't realize that they have those moments, and that they have a lot of possibility to create a pivotal moment, a turning point, where life just takes a new twist and turn. And very often, it is in moments of dire need. It is in moments of anxiety when new habits form. So you'll hear of stories of people who've had a near-death experience. They're driving their car, and all of a sudden they ride off the road, and they leave their body, and then they come back again, and they're fatally, nearly fatally ill, and they nearly were fatally wiped out, and they recover from all of that. And then what do? They turn their life to God, and suddenly they live a very pious life, and life has changed. They're never the same as they were before. You can go on the internet. I know of people who have done that. Clients have come to see me who've made these pivotal choices. They've had a child who's died of something. Suddenly they've turned to God. They've become very religious, life changes. And very soon after that pivotal point, habits form, and they create a new habit. They're either now very active and seek fitness and good health and all sorts of things because it was maybe an illness that they had, or in times of deep anxiety. We hear it, Yvonne and I will hear it over and over again with smokers. They'll go for 40 years without smoking a cigarette, and then somebody gets sick, and that person's in hospital, and this is somebody who's attending the sick person in hospital, and they get overwhelmed by their anxiety, and in that moment of malleability, life changes, and they straight away go back to their smoking habit, and they're back there smoking 40 cigarettes a day. And if anxiety, if those big traumatic moments can create pivotal points, and they can create malleability in life, it like suddenly just softens the case so that you can shape it into something else. And after a little while, it just solidifies in the new shape. Then can't we take advantage of that? And can't we find ways to soften ourselves and come to realizations and make a pivotal change? Take a turning point, put a kink in the storyline, and hopefully a kink not towards like taking on detrimental habits, but a kink towards going into something that is beautiful and wonderful and inspiring and just restful. And I have a feeling, bring it back to the George Floyd thing, I have a feeling that there is a pivotal moment happening in the American psyche right now. I think some politicians are really trying to push it forward. I think, sadly, right now, America is split down the middle. Half of it is red, half of it is blue. And I think there is a political will to push for change. And in corporations, so if some of those big corporations started to take policy decisions a little bit like the Love Serve Remember Foundation, if corporations could start to do that, we'd start to see a change from within the business, within the psyche, within the people. I think you're starting to see a fundamental change inside people. But whether this will get translated to American corporate world or American culture or into American politics, I don't know. Because there are those that are ready for that kind of change in terms of leadership, but there are also those who are deeply afraid of it. And fear drives a different dialogue, and a dialogue of maybe fear of needing to share power or needing to share resources. I don't really know what it is. Trying to map it back to old South Africa, and what was that fear about? Why couldn't we just one day walk out into the streets and say, here are the old apartheid laws. Guys, come join us. We're burning the old flag. We're burning the old laws. We're having a big bonfire outside the union buildings. Come and join us. And from tomorrow, we're all just going to be one nation. It's too much fear. It's too risky. And so you can see that American culture that's sort of divided down the middle. There's a part here that I just want to sort of conclude with that's in this 3-page letter from the Ramdas Foundation that I thought I'd just read in its entirety. Okay, this is Ramdas in 1983 when he wrote this. He said, "Even though we find ourselves afraid and not feeling peaceful and less than fully loving and compassionate, we must act. There is no way you can be an incarnation without acting. We cannot wait until we are enlightened to act. We all hear the way in which our silence is itself an act of acquiescence to a system. That is as much an action as walking. Since we must act, we do the best we can to act consciously and compassionately. But in addition, we can make every action an exercise designed to help us to become free. Because the truth that comes from freedom and the power that comes from freedom and the love and compassion that comes from freedom are the jewels we can cultivate to offer our fellow sentient beings for the relief of their suffering." So that's kind of, we've got 10 minutes left, and Zoom is already putting up a little flag to say that our time will be truncated pretty quickly. But it's a fantastic thing, and if anyone has a very brief comment, you're very welcome to put it out. And at the end of our time allocation, I'm very happy to come back into the room with the same password, with the same meeting ID, and we can carry on another little bit of a chat, a round robin chat, until such a time as we get kicked out of the room again. Anyone want to say something? Clement just said he's popped out the room for a few minutes, but he'll be back in a sec. Yep, Yvonne, please.
I think everybody knows that we need to change. Everybody wants the change. And I think many are still stuck in the thinking, well, what can I change? You know, who am I out of 8 billion people? How can I provoke that change? But to me, that is like sitting back and just watching and doing nothing. And if we listen to Ramdas, who says we must act, then we need each one to devise one thing that we can change, one simple action. And it's, you know, it's like when you want to start getting fit and do gym, then you think, oh, I have to do so much. But you don't. You actually just need to get up and start walking and put one foot in front of the other. So I kind of like to think of if each one of us does one drop, then one drop adds to another drop, and that drop eventually comes into a wave and turns into a tsunami. And one drop is not a lot. So I think if we all introspect and say, what is the one drop that I can do? And if 8 billion people would do that, then we would have a tsunami of change.
Yvonne, don't you think also that, go back to that metaphor of the storyline, your storyline in those pages, that folio, it's not about changing the world. Remember one day when Tarek said to me, why are you a vegetarian, and do you think that being a vegetarian is going to change the world? And I said to him, I don't do it because I want to save the world. I want to do it only because I want to do it for me. And I want to put it in my storyline because I've got to live that storyline. And if we just change our storyline, if we align our storyline, those new pages, those blank pages, with our highest self, I think that's effort enough. And that itself will have a knock-on effect in the world. We see a whole lot of change in people's demeanor because of coronavirus. And I think now because of I think people have had a chance, they've had a taste of that introspection because of coronavirus. And now when this George Floyd thing came along at the same time, it gave them a chance to introspect on what was happening. And that's why I think it's such a big thing. Whereas before, people were busy and going to work and doing their thing. And this is not the first or last of these incidences, but those previous incidences got a spike of anger, and people did what they needed, and then it was over. I think this one comes from a base where people are already happy and ready and hungry for change. And that's why in the time they have, they go out and they're protesting as much as they do.
You know, now they have time to do something, but we must also make those changes, even if we don't have the time now. Everybody has time on their hand. But it just popped into my head 2 years ago. I came back with all these little net bags from Switzerland, which the Swiss shops were selling for very little money. You could buy a packet of 6 little nets with a string, and it had the label on the side where you can go into the vegetable shop, take 5 oranges and put them into the bag, weigh it, put the price on the side, and into the same bag you could put 2 apples and put another tag on the side, and just stick all these labels and have in one bag my various vegetables or fruit or whatever, and take another bag, and then
a reusable bag.
Reusable, yes. So when I always go and shop at Food Lovers Market here, and when I went to Food Lovers Market, I came to the cashier the first time with those bags, and she took them out and weighed them again. Because of course at Food Lovers Market you don't have that facility like you have in Europe. So she weighed it and then wanted to pack it into plastic bags. I said, no, I don't want plastic bags. It says, yeah, but you can't take them one by one. I said, yes, you've already weighed it. I don't want the bag. Just pop it into the box like that. And I almost had an incident with the cashier because she just did not understand. And I explained, I don't want plastic to go to the sea. And she looked at me with big eyes. But look, in 2 years, and I'm not saying it's me who's brought the change is many, many people who have started this, and everyone who picks it up just makes that wave bigger. Today in South Africa, when I say anywhere in a shop, no, I don't want a plastic bag. And look at the shops. Everybody is now, Woolworths and other shops are bringing reusable bags that you buy for 30 Rand, and then you bring those shopping bags with you. So the change is happening. And it's because of every one person who adopts that. And so it is with Floyd.
Yeah.
People out there are tired of, they're becoming aware of it, and everyone is stepping out. Even in Switzerland, there's demonstrations.
How many of us as South Africans are prepared to write a letter to the New York Times or the Washington Post to say, you know what, guys, we've been through this. We know what needs to happen, and it's not such a scary thing after all. It's going to make change. It's going to linger for a while, but this is a very important thing. Again, I think somehow we think we're so far down south here, we've got no voice, we've got nothing that we can contribute. Yes, Ken, just unmute your mic. Awesome.
Yeah, yes, look, what happened in America obviously is not correct what has happened there. But we've got to look at the role that the media are playing in this and how the media is rolling this out worldwide. What is the difference that happened there, that happened in our first week of lockdown? Our black soldiers killed and kicked the guy to death. Nothing happened about that. Last night, a farmer, Barney van Dyken in Komas, was brutally attacked by 20 cops, covered in machine guns, covered. He was brutally attacked for nothing. So yes, what has happened there, we cannot condone that, but we must look at the role the media are playing. The media are hyping this whole thing, and in that process, Antifa and the right-wing guys in America, like you said, is climbing in, and they are just looting. It's not anymore protest, it's looting. It's a big difference between looting and between protest. So yes, but also it happened here by us, and not the world didn't say anything about it.
I think the media always has an agenda, and the media's agenda is to make money and to get viewership or listenership, readership, because that's the way they're going to sell advertising later on down the line. And I know that is, the moment there's an agenda like that, there's no neutrality in it. People will take sides. They will spin a story that is going to sell the newspaper or get more people to listen to the story, connect with them. And so one has to, you're right, Ken, one has to very carefully we have to very carefully watch that, and we have to be unbiased and keep our eyes peeled. Thanks, Clement.
Last week after the circle, I was watching a YouTube video of a musician called Moby. He's fairly well known. I know it's just a small group, but Moby, he's been around, does all sorts of music styles and things, and he brought out an album and he was discussing it. And he kind of described what he'd said, and this is a paraphrase of it. And it's quite simplistic, but it struck me again this morning. So if you'll indulge me for 2 minutes, I'm just going to read this. It's like 3 paragraphs. So he speaks of a recurring theme of separation, of being inherently, fundamentally prevented from knowing objective truth, from knowing who and what we are. And he says, even though I'm not a Christian in any normal sense of the word, that one of the opening images of the Old Testament of humanity leaving the Garden of Eden, thereby leaving the presence of God or the divine. And he's not talking of any specific dogma. It's not that type of individual. It's just on the idea of leaving the presence of the divine. There's something about humanity that has separated us from objective truth. from the divine, if you will. And maybe that's just inherent to biological life or to humanity, this separation. Or maybe it's just us. Or maybe at some point we can heal it. And he says, which I actually like this, I have absolutely no hopes, and regardless of the pandemic, there's still so much beauty in the world. There's so much, even if we separate it from objective truth and objective knowledge, that we can still look at and appreciate. We can look at a beautiful day. We can still eat food that heals us, which isn't the product of suffering. We can still experience, for lack of a better word, the divine, even if we're separated from it. And this morning I was driving home from the shops, and I'm up very early in the mornings doing all sorts of things, and it's quite chilly. Driving home from the shops this morning, just before the Zoom meeting, I looked up and there was this blue sky out there, and there was this warm sun shining on me, and it immediately reminded me what it said is, we just need to take, even if it's 5 minutes of our day. I mean, those of us who are in the Southern Hemisphere are very fortunate. Go outside and look at how amazing this weather is today. If you were in Europe today, it would be a summer's day. Running outside, clothes off, beside themselves, and we're curled up indoors with our jerseys going, oh, it's winter. Go stand outside in the sun for 5 minutes, get the vitamin D, and look at that blue sky. In that 5 minutes, be reminded that, that there's still beauty out there. The world is rough. We don't need to be reminded of the darkness of it and the negativity of it every single minute of the day.
You know what, Clement? It just came into my mind. This coronavirus for the world is a bit like the cancer was for me as an individual. And when you come in a time in your life to a point where you say, oh shit, this could be it, this could be the end, and what do I do about it? Like Tom said, do I put the black frame around it, or do I paint my little roses all around it? And my experience since then, of which Sundance and everything is part, what stands out most is that every morning when the sun rises, it is another day. Every sunrise is another day. And that, of course, has really come to me from the Sundance ceremonies, because the First Nation people are so connected with nature, and it's that love and connection for nature that I have experienced with them. And I really live that every morning. I wake up early. Tom can say 5:30 in the morning. I'm out. With the first shimmer through the curtains, I'm awake, and I'm out, and I go down to the medicine wheel and I have a moment of meditation. Now it's really cold, so I don't, but sometimes I just run outside and stand in the sunrise, and I take a photo, or I just bask in the sunrise, and I play the sunrise song, and I'll share that on the group, the sunrise song. And that one song has got the words with it, and I won't say no more. Listen to it and read the few words that go with it, because it's just absolutely beautiful.
Yeah, I've come to call it vitamin divine. Vitamin D is so essential.
I love
so
it.
Essential to our well-being and our mind state.
So beautiful, Clement.
So do you take all your clothes off and go and stand in the sunshine?
Oh no, I don't want to scare the birds.
Vitamin divine, I love it. How beautiful is that?
So thanks, guys.
Tom, you have a story that you once told me about baboons on 2 islands. It was an experiment that went wrong. It was 2 groups of baboons on 2 islands, and then something with sweet potatoes or something. Can you just maybe tell that story again? Because
carry on.
Because it's sort of what I'm hoping is happening at the moment. Yvonne, I'm with you with the isolation and what illness caused for me and for you, and what it is causing, I hope, for other people. I just don't know if it's though. There are days that I think really, okay, it's going well. Maybe everyone will wake up and realize what we've been doing or what we should be doing. And then other days, I don't know. I don't know if that percentage of us that are trying so hard is enough.
So I think the story comes from Lynn McTaggart's The Field. I think that's where I read it, but I don't quote me on that. And it is what very often happens is people get research grants, and they have a particular thing that they're trying to research, or they're trying to prove a particular point. And if that experiment fails, they just chuck that experiment. They put it in a bottom drawer somewhere, and those kind of experiments go cold. So this was they were studying animal behavior, and they were looking somewhere at those Indonesian islands, and they'd found 2 islands separated by a very large tract of sea, and on both of those islands there were monkeys, and these monkeys were more or less, there were 2 troops, and these 2 troops were more or less of the same size, and they both had an alpha male, and they both behaved in a particular way. And then what they wanted, they were doing is, I can't remember what the original thing was that they were trying to establish, but they captured the alpha male, put him in captivity, and taught him how to dig in the soil for sweet potatoes, and how he could take that and dust all the soil off and then eat the sweet potato, because it was a very delicious thing for him to eat. And so they then put him back with the troop and planted on both islands, because the second island was a control group, because they hadn't captured and taught the alpha male anything there. They planted an acre of sweet potatoes, and they watched how these monkeys would come down, and how this alpha male would come down and start to eat the sweet potatoes and eat it, and how none of the other troop did for a while. And then after a bit, some of the others started to learn through observation how to do it. But on the control group, no monkey ate sweet potatoes ever. And then they watched how the number of monkeys started to increase, and they plotted that very carefully, and they saw it was slow, and all of a sudden it reached a tipping point where just practically overnight, from like 40% of the monkeys, all of them just suddenly within a week were eating sweet potatoes. But the strange thing was that when it reached that tipping point, all the monkeys on the other island also suddenly started to eat sweet potatoes, and that's what caused them to throw the experiment away, because their control group had been compromised, and that went in the bottom drawer. Until somebody else pulled all those, there's some scientists that go around the world looking at failed experiments, because if you put it in conjunction with other research that also went awry, you might be able to see things that come out of that that give us new clues as to behavior. And they said maybe this was not a failure. What if this is some kind of evolutionary necessity, that when a species learns a skill for survival, that somewhere in the Akashic field or some other place, they put an energy out there. Connection a bit shaky on that. So it's sort of this time of the Sunday when people start to watch Netflix and things. But they said, what if this is right? What if the one troop of baboons learned the skill, was to their advantage, and wrote it in the field, which the other troop of baboons picked out of the field and suddenly just adopted that habit? And then they find that spiders do the same. And I think it's in the McTaggart's book about the field.
Sure, yeah.
And then spiders do the same, and they started to see that this is maybe the way it happened with humans. And I know this is Graham Hancock's book, where he says that he talked about ancient rock art, and there's rock art that happened here in South Africa with Koi, and then in France, more or less the same time, people were also suddenly just doing rock art. And scientists are looking for a physical explanation for that. And was it because we suddenly saw magic mushrooms and ingested them, and that liberated the mind, and we were all doing art more or less at the same time? That's a possible explanation, that those mushrooms are around forever in the forest anyway. Why didn't that happen more haphazardly? Or was it more or less what happened where it's reached a pivot point in human evolution, where when we started to do art and found expression, that we wrote something in the field that was useful to tap out of the field in terms of original idea and thought, and sapiens all over the world started to do the same.
A parallel to that is what we saw at the museum in Abu Dhabi. In Abu Dhabi, the Louvre of Abu Dhabi, they had an exhibition with different cases, and in each case, they put an artifact that they found at one end of the world and another artifact at the other end of the world next to each other, and from a similar time period, but at complete opposite ends of the world, in times, of course, where there was absolutely no travel. And there were similar symbolisms in belief and religion, and really speaking, one can only explain it with that it has been somehow written in the Akashic field.
That's a good point, because those people couldn't travel across continents or reach each other in any way.
Like thousands of years ago,
and yet, even in design, even in their ideas, it's almost as though these enclaves, these little pockets of sapiens all over the place, were doing more or less the same thing. They were sort of coming up with similar ideas and inspiration more or less at the same time. You could probably do a virtual tour of the Louvre in Abu Dhabi and see that backstory, because it's not just a museum of artifacts. It's interesting. The whole museum is around this crazy phenomenon of how human history in pockets of isolation have come out with astoundingly similar things.
And it's about belief, because it's all about sort of religious symbolisms, the deities, and it's a phenomenal exhibition. We took a lot of photos. I think I might also find, if we forget fluffing thousands of photos. But Tom is probably right. I'm sure you can do a virtual tour or find something online. Abu Dhabi's Louvre. It's very interesting.
Why did you need that, Mama? You said
no, I was reminded of the story, and I was Martin and I have been having this discussion. I went through a couple of deep rabbit holes, you know, and about the press being who and what they are. And if you see the control over the masses, it's quite scary, you know. And then on Facebook, where I am, a lot of people are waking up, you know, realizing what's going on. But I'm just wondering if there's enough. There are so many people unaware of how their strings are being pulled. Yeah, so at the moment it feels like we've got two futures, you know. We've got the scary one where we send our kids to school with masks and sanitizers and these isolation boxes, and I mean, that is just not the way I want to raise my children. And then there's this other
box, the little cardboard box that you put your kid in, and it's got 3 little holes.
Yeah, have you seen the pictures? I mean, there's no way to raise a human anything, child, person, grown up, it doesn't matter. And then there's this other future where, you know, we wake up and we realize Mother Earth is who and what she is, and we're supposed to be taking care of her and each other. I don't know.
But you know, Marna,
I'm not very optimistic at the moment, and it's quite scary.
But you know, Marna, if we go back to that experiment with the monkeys precisely, and if you haven't read the book of Lynn McTaggart called The Field,
I have.
You have.
Yeah.
So if we take this onto ourselves with the situation now, if we all take our attention away from the negative and we project the positive, the change that needs to happen, wouldn't that then influence people all around the world to do the same? Just like the monkeys influence the monkeys on the other side. When it comes to a tipping point, when we are sufficient people who start thinking like that, that should theoretically and I think practically influence the whole energy of the world. Yes, Clement?
Yeah. Yeah, this should, and yes, it should, but I don't know if it's enough yet.
There's a very simple old saying: "Be the change you want to see in the world."
Yeah, no, true.
And we forget that, and we have to remind ourselves of that. It's difficult for us to keep at it sometimes, and then you accept that you're not being the change you want to see for a while, and then you find ways and means to get back to it. That has encouraged me quite a bit, I must admit, when I was in the dumps.
Yeah, it seems to be a recurring message for me as well. You know, I follow a wide variety of groups, and it'll get very dark for a while, and then there will be someone that posts something, but just remember, and then, you know, be the change or focus on the positive. And I know, it's just, it's not always, it is actually easy, I think. Maybe I'm just impatient, you know, I want to see the change now, not in 10 years or something.
Then you wanted to say something?
If I can come in, yeah. I think, and I was part of it in many conversations, and I think in the circle of friends, there were so many times that we said, something must change. We cannot continue like this. So the universe has listened to us. Something is changing. The question here is that this pandemic must bring change about, otherwise it is in vain.
Yes.
That is the important thing here. I think the other thing is that for the future, I think there's 2 schools of thought in the business world at the moment. There are some business leaders that are saying that they're just waiting, everything will return to normal like before. There's the other guys that are now saying, so let's move from profit being the ultimate to sustainability coming in. So they use the terminology prosperity versus profit. So if out of this change we can get this thinking, prosperity versus profit. Okay.
Yeah, that's a profound thing, that, and if business culture can do that, then you know, that's already a pivotal point in finance and the way the world hangs together. Eh?
And you know the book, The Tipping Point. I don't know if you ever heard about The Tipping Point.
Malcolm Gladwell.
That's a really, really good book. It's a bit like those monkeys. When it comes to a certain amount, when that wave crests, it goes and goes and goes and goes, and then there is a time it can go back and fall back. But when it goes over that tipping point, then it can only go